Welcome to Nomadic Diaries, a podcast revealing secrets of life lived overseas. We use storytelling to deliver insight and information on what it takes to live, love, move, and travel across the globe. Our guests are professionals from the world of global mobility. We hope that by opening their diaries to share their wisdom, that you, our listener, can benefit and enjoy more ease and grace in your expat life abroad. Hey listeners, I would like to introduce you to my co-host, Sharon Fields.
Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have today as our guest, Monica Neubauer. Monica is an international speaker and an award-winning real estate agent. She's been married to her husband, Mark, for 35 years. They are entrepreneurs. They have launched 5 businesses, which is amazing. And right now, Monica's a host of 2 podcasts. The first podcast is the National Association of Realtors Center for Realtor Development. And the other podcast is an open conversation with Mark and Monica. She spent significant time in 20 countries and returned in the U.S. in 1995 after 6 years of living abroad, mostly in Asia. So, Monica, tell us about living abroad and then coming back to the U.S. How is that?
Well, when we lived abroad, we were young, so there was still so much adventure, and life was not complicated, and that was a great thing. And actually, my mother was born and raised in Sweden. So I actually had that international experience from growing up in my youth. My mom spoke with an accent, even though I couldn't hear it. And we went to Sweden as a child. They were committed to take us to Sweden. So I had already been living overseas, traveling overseas. And then when Mark and I started traveling overseas, it was just a great adventure. We were both so up for it, and it was fun and it was exciting. So yeah, it was a big adventure. Yeah. Coming home was less of an adventure, though. I'll say that.
Well, so while we're on that topic, tell us maybe from your experiences, what are some tips that would help people prepare to come back into their home country?
All right. Preparing to come back.
So that it's not traumatic and it's not, cold turkey.
Well, and actually, even my daughter is living overseas right now. And so I'm kind of thinking about that. She's 28 and she'll be moving back next year. So I'm kind of been thinking about that a little bit. When I moved back in 1995 and when people move back now in 2023, it's not the same, and I was thinking, Doreen, it's been a while since you came back from the living overseas. I mean, you're certainly still an international explorer, but for my daughter to come home now, she already is communicating with me. She's still communicating with her friends. So her relationships are still close. She is coming home to something a little more current. When we came home in 1995, we had just been writing letters with our family. We really didn't keep up with our friends at all. So that's one of the things coming home. I think you're definitely going to find and be prepared to find a new group of friends. Now, does that mean you're not going to be friends with people you were with before? No. And I have to say that as I've lived here longer, I have gone back to some of the friendships I had before I lived overseas, but it kind of took a while. My immediate friends when I got back was a new group because I felt so changed being overseas that when I came back, it wasn't just an automatic, let's start hanging out together all the time, because they were doing something different than when I had been there before. And now I came back and I was living somewhere different. And now I was having 2 kids. So, life passes. So whether you're communicating with people or not, life has passed while you've lived overseas. You've grown one way. Your friends have grown another way. So I think it's fair currently to come back and expect you're going to get with some of those people again. But I would say don't be disappointed if you're going to need to get some new friends or if you're not connecting with all your old friends in the same way, because you've kind of gone through this time warp a little bit about how you've grown separately and in different directions. So that would be the first thing I would say, is to expect to have and look for some new friends, because you're also going to have this international experience that has changed you in such a way as you're curious about people who are different than you. You've experienced a lot of different cultures. And so some of the things that concern you about your life here are, again, going to be different than what your friends who haven't been traveling internationally are concerned about. So you're going to want to find some friends who have some of your now current interests.
That's great advice.
Yes, great advice. And so I would say amongst those friends, do you think it's important to juggle friends that are actually physically present in the place that you're going to with our international communities? Because before, I lived overseas for 20 or 30 years before we had the internet.
Yes.
And now I realize that I lean on my tech community almost as much as I lean on my physical pickleball and friendship community here in San Miguel.
Interesting thought about that. And I know, in some of this, I'm taking some of my daughter's experience because she's overseas right now. So now my mother watched me go bye-bye and, hardly just did letters. And now I've sent my daughter off into the universe, and she's been living overseas the better part of a few years. And what I have observed with her, and I would agree with this, even had it been similar for me, is it's very hard. And I think this is a little different than your current situation, Doreen, and I'll come back to why. For her to be friends with a lot of her friends here in the States, again, they're living 2 completely different tracks. Yeah. And so my daughter does not like to text. And of course, that's what most of the younger people prefer that. Not all, but a lot of them do. And she's on a different time zone. So there's still a lot that makes it difficult for her to be friends internationally so she really keeps up with her 4 good friends, 3 good friends, 1 or 2 more than others, and then, some family members. But that's really all. It's even like juggling too many friends here. It's just hard to connect that way. And she does have her friends there. So I would say, 1, internationally, it's difficult. Now, one thing for you is seeing that you're in Mexico, you're still at least in the time zone that most of your tech friends, not all,
for the first time ever in 50 years of adventuring. So that's one of the reasons, because there wasn't an ocean and the time difference.
Yes. And so the time difference makes a big thing. But also, there's just so much difference. So I would say keep in touch with your best friends, but that's an interesting concept. I think people need to give themselves permission, especially for the first 6 months, to really be where they have moved to and know who you're going to keep up with on the going back home. And then you have to give yourself peace to not be as connected. For you've been international your whole life. And so you have so many good friends around the world. So I think it depends on how many friends you have around the world, how much you want to keep up with them. Being a traveler and a speaker myself, I do have a number of friends who I'm friends with around the world. But man, I really, really need my local friends. I need the people I can have coffee with. So we really need both.
I would agree with that. I would agree for people who are returning that it's important to make friends in the location that you're in, And I think that now that I've been doing this for so long, and obviously with the podcast, it's easier to be more connected online, because since COVID, of course, we've had to be connected online. So it's learning how to jive with these two communities. And I would just also add that there's places and organizations that your daughter can participate in if she joins Internations. Are you familiar with Internations?
No, I should
So
get that.
Internations is a huge global organization. It's in every major city almost across the globe.
Yeah.
And what it is a collection of people from other destinations. Many of them are third culture kids, TCKs, CCKs, but there are people who have come to one destination, and they organize social events, they organize sporting events, they organize sort of discussion groups on the subject of living cross-culturally.
Oh, nice.
So that's really something for her to look out for. Where is she moving to?
Well, she's in Tokyo right now.
Right.
We'll see. She hopes to stay in Asia a little bit longer, perhaps go to Hong Kong. And then sometime next year, we expect her back here. And I think, and she's going to be fine adjusting over there because she's in an international community. She's already connected, in her workplace and with friends. And when they were in Shanghai before, the international community was much broader. In Tokyo, it's less so. It's not as easy to get as connected, but
yeah.
But it's interesting to say when you get home to the US, that's where I want her to find some of those international people, because I want her to connect with people who've had those similar international experiences, because they understand what you've been living in.
Exactly.
And they have that different worldview that is the direction that you've gone in living overseas.
Yeah. They have the mindset, they have the frequency, they have the cross-cultural agility, they have the cultural intelligence.
Yep.
And they have developed competencies in the process. So those are all big, words that we use in intercultural communication all the time. But those are things that are kind of invisible. And I think it's a great thing to encourage our next generation of global citizens to talk about those things. Because one of the things that they're discovering now is that when this community comes home, they don't necessarily have the language to talk about what are the secret superpowers that they brought back with them.
Interesting.
And she is bringing back secret superpowers. And and so
I did the Superman sign. She's going to be the superwoman with the superpowers. And she'll love to hear that, because, it's so easy for us to look at ourselves and what we lack. And so it'll be so great for her to remind her how well you cross-culturally engage.
I hope that she listens to this, actually, because I would just encourage everyone. My daughter had a similar odyssey in her 20s and worked in London and Europe and Ireland, and then went on this big journey for over a couple of years down in South America, and finally came back. But when she planted herself, she really put down roots. She was like, I am in the US and I am going to be rooted here. And it was a conscious, intentional effort to do that every single day. So I would also add that every single morning when you wake up, you say, I am growing roots. I am growing roots.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. I like it. Yeah. And when she comes home, it's going to be time for that. And I think you're right. It's going to take that consciousness. And when we came home, so many years ago, we did have the opportunity to purchase a house that was near my family. And so, yes, we knew we were staying here, and we were very intentional with where we decided to live. And that's a big deal.
It is.
Because you're living overseas, you may or may not be floating, you may have been grounded, but then you come home and it's like, well, where do I want to live? And in this age, you have so many options.
Choices. Yes.
Yeah. And so we chose, with our small children, we chose to live near my family. And so it was for us setting up roots. And I still live in the town that I grew up in Franklin, Tennessee. And, we've built our life here. And we've still kind of always felt a little fish out of water-ish, having all those global experiences. But
yes,
I've found new ways to apply that in my life as I've grown.
So tell me about, I would love to hear about that. So now you are a trainer training real estate agents.
Yes.
So what secret superpowers from living interculturally do you think that you use in your current capacity?
Well, just to start with, my superpower is just the understanding that cultures are so different. You know, it's a word that we've taken now as a little bit of a buzzword of culture being different, but
Right.
I still think a lot of Americans anyway don't have a full grasp on how different a culture can be. You know, when you go to another country, you have the aha of, yeah, those people do not think like me. I mean, they completely do not think about things the same way that I do. And that was such a huge aha, you know, and even when you're in, you know, I mean, we had experiences in India where we were like, well, you don't think like they, I mean, I could even see their cultural differences in their country.
Yeah.
And so coming back now, I can see the vast number of cultural affects, if you will, you know, I mean, so it gives me such a sensitivity to even, you know, as we've been having more of the social conversations in the last 2 or 3 years, just an even greater awareness to what are Black Americans experiencing, you know, and then you have Black Africans come in and they have a completely different culture and experience. And, you know, a lot of the white people would look at that and think they would be similar. And it's like, no.
Different beings.
That's not even a thing. And so I do have the privilege now. I teach at home with diversity. I teach about bias. We talk about fair housing a lot in community. And I have the privilege of having these international experiences to bring, you know, my cross-cultural experiences is not just with American cultures. It's truly with different cultures around the world, different social classes, different generations. And that helps me talk about how different we all are in so many ways.
And do you think the people that you're talking to get it?
Well,
sometimes. Sometimes.
Well, let's all hope that they do.
Well, and you do the best you can. And here's my belief on people adjusting to people who are different than them.
Yes.
It comes from one experience being layered on top of another. So, you know, the place that I am now that I'm able to view came from 6 years of living overseas. It came from, you know, coming back and observing things and saying, why do I not fit in here? What's happening with those people? Gosh, my community has changed and the culture of my community has changed. It created an awareness for me to layer. And I mean, I have to tell you, when I got back to the States, there was a certain way that I was, and I have been changed just by being open and meeting different people, largely since I got home. But I think my overseas time showed me just how different people can think. So once I got home and I started listening to people's stories, I think I could believe them easier because I knew that people could live differently than me. And so that's what I would say to people now. My desire when I teach and speak with these classes and people who come to the class is just to say, open your mind to learn about one group. You know, even if it's your grandkids, you and your grandkids are not talking the same language. Let's just start there and then, you know, move to other people in your community and other people in your industry, because it's a layered thing and it doesn't happen quickly for any of us.
I would agree. It's almost a thought by thought thing, isn't it? Or a moment by moment thing. I'd like to go back a little bit to the Africa thing and the African Americans. I lived in Africa, in West Africa for 2 years. And then a few years later, I married an American fellow in Dubai. We were wedded in Dubai. And I tease people, I say, oh, it was a marriage made in the Middle East. It wasn't exactly made in heaven. But anyway, he brought me back to Louisiana, where there were a lot of African Americans. And I was trying to relate to them like they were Africans, and they were not. I mean, our essence, our depth. If you could, unzip ourselves and feel and sense each other, it's very, very different. And that goes back to what you said about how potent culture is, because it is a very powerful asset and affect that most of us are mostly unaware of most of the time. And so I agree with you. The layers is a great way to look at that. How about you, Sharon?
Well, I think it's such a great point that she has made. And I never really thought about it in it affecting us over the years. And maybe that is how we grow and learn to love more people. It's so different when you go just a vacation or a 2-week tour to Europe and you come home. But when you live overseas and you live in a different country and you learn about those people and how their beliefs and how they have evolved into their cultural beings, it really is totally different. It is so different.
And I would like to know exactly where to go with this conversation, because one of the things that we had discussed with Monica is don't be overwhelmed by what you cannot aspire to or what you can't have right in the moment. And this goes to speaking about cultural understandings, but it also talks to aspirational, because you are in a very aspirational industry. You are in the housing industry, and everyone aspires to have at least one home. So tell me about the gratitude principles that you teach people about.
Oh gosh, there's again, layers in all of what you just said. Let me start with the root of kind of that, and then I'll get into the gratitude part of it. And when we lived in Asia in the early 90s, we didn't have grocery stores. And there were places you could buy food, but largely it was all raw and uncooked. And,
yes.
If we found oatmeal, we bought every bag. And so
yes.
the whole concept of getting what you want is, I can't get everything I want in this country. And even currently, that's true. When I was with my daughter in Tokyo, I'm not a huge fan of Japanese food. And I do love so many international food styles, but that's not my favorite one. And we found a place that served Latin food, Mexican food. And oh my gosh, we just both were like running in there. We couldn't wait to eat. It was so delightful. And there were mostly white foreigners in the restaurant.
Yes. I think I know that restaurant. We went to that restaurant in Tokyo when we lived there in 1995, and we spent an entire day looking for this Tex-Mex restaurant that was in the whole of Tokyo.
Right, exactly. So, you could go to the store and buy things, but, they may not have a, quote, international aisle at their grocery store. So you may not be able to get salsa. So when you're in another country, here's another example. I just have to tell this story. I was in Germany, and in Europe, they serve the coffee in small cups and in small amounts. And being an American who likes coffee, I want a big old coffee, so one day we went to McDonald's and got a big old cup of coffee. And I put on my Instagram, I said, don't judge me. I can't do these little tiny cups of coffee. I need a giant cup of coffee,
Yes.
But so those are examples of simple things that we would like to have, but they're not available. Does that mean I don't have the option of the delicious food? No, I have great, delicious food. It just takes a little bit more effort, or, I have to look around a little bit more, or I can have a good small cup of coffee, but I can't have the big cup of coffee. So it really went back to the Rolling Stone song of, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you're going to find you get what you need. And, that was one of our mottos when we were traveling overseas was, I may not get what I want, but I'm going to get what I need. And, to bring that up to the point of your question of the gratitude thing is, I am grateful for what I can get and what I have. I'm grateful that I can bring some instant coffee packages in my suitcase so I can have that cup of coffee. And I'm grateful for the options that are available. And then some days you choose to take the extra effort to go find something that makes you even more grateful for whatever it is you wanted to get, whether it's a visit with a friend that you have to travel to the next town to, whether it, takes you all day to go across town to a store that makes you feel comfortable. Finding the gratefulness for where you find places of peace when you're traveling, a favorite
I love that.
restaurant, a favorite park, and just recognizing that. Also a gratefulness for I have what I need. I may not have everything I want right now, but I have what I need. And honestly, even living in the United States, don't I have to say I'm grateful for what I have, because I don't get to go buy whatever I want. And but yet I have an amazing of this and this and this. Just because I can't buy that doesn't mean I don't have what I need, and even in a good form.
So do you think that intercultural living helps you develop that muscle? Because I believe that's a mental muscle. A mental muscle is something that you look for the good, the positive, the satisfying, no matter how small it is, because sometimes it can just be a tiny crack. I remember living in Yokohama, and on a Wednesday night, they would drop the prices of the steak at 9:00 at night. And so
the manager's special.
At 9:00 at night, you would find me belting down the just a few blocks away from our apartment. And I would be at the store when they dropped the prices of that fantastic Kobe beef, which I couldn't afford any other time.
Wow.
And, it was just such a treat. And it's these little things. And I always look for the little things, because somehow they, like the layers, they all mount up to make a very satisfying experience.
They are the special things in our lives that we remember and tell stories about later.
Yes. And the more open you are along those lines, the more opportunities come up. If there's no McDonald's for me to get a coffee shop, I guess I'll go to this tea shop and get some tea over there and have a nice beverage. Well, then when you go into the tea shop, people are sitting around chatting. So then you're going to have a conversation with somebody who's local, not somebody who's necessarily hanging out at the McDonald's. So when you lean into getting what you need instead of what you wish you had, or what was Western, coming from the Western point of view, then I'm having a different experience, because I'm in their space and I want to get their vibe and their experience. And then I have good conversation generally.
And that's what helps. Yes, that's what creates the cultural competency. It's those moments. It's like looking for that. So one of the things you had mentioned was accepting the differences that seem like difficulties, because they become your new reality. Can you speak a little bit about differences that seem like difficulties, but then when we spend time and practice tolerance and become more self-aware of our own biases, we develop it's almost like you expand.
Yeah. Well, okay. A couple of things are kind of coming to my mind. They may not be the best examples, but let's say you live in Asia. That's mostly where my experiences are. And so in Asia, I'm not going to own a car. So I'm going to have to take some kind of public transportation. So whether it's a tuk-tuk or it's a taxi, or, it was amazing to me how in Shanghai and in China, the taxis were affordable and easy, but we could talk about money. Oh my gosh, what a stressor that is these days. But anyway, in Shanghai, the taxis were easy to get. In Tokyo, they're expensive.
Yes.
And you have to take the bus. I mean, you can't take a bus, and sometimes that's good, or you take a train. But the transportation is a good example of that. I'm going to have to lean into, what do I need to take to get where I want to go? And how long is it going to take? When we were in Tokyo, it would take an hour to get anywhere we wanted to go. And so you plan for your luggage, your shoes. How are you shopping? Are you going to be gone all day? Do you want to take the right food? And when we would travel, in China with my son, he would always live on a backpack. I mean, ours was a backpack and a bicycle. And when my bicycle was stolen, it was so tragic.
I feel you. That is the saddest thing.
I know. But you adapt to that. And then riding the bike becomes this fabulous form of freedom. And then I put my son in this backpack. I don't know why more American mothers don't carry their kids around in a backpack. That was the bomb. And we take him places and then he would, I'd have 2 pairs of wool socks on him and no shoes. And these Chinese mamas and grandmamas, they would not have it that he did not have shoes on. Didn't matter that he had on 2 pairs of wool socks and couldn't walk. He did not have on shoes and they would fuss up one side and down the other, which largely I could tolerate. And I just took that as a cultural experience and engagement, but then to kind of keep going on the same track of it was interesting. It created conversation for a while and I could laugh at it and talk to them and engage them and practice my language. To take it to the next step is sometimes it would just be stop talking and leave me alone. It's my child and he's fine. So you have to watch some of those things that are joyful or that you can choose to adapt to, and they can choose to be good when you're well rested and you're ready for it. It can be an adventure, a learning experience and fun. But when you're tired, you've been out all day, you're coming home and now you're just exhausted. That's where your cultural competencies just shrink.
Yes, absolutely.
Now you're operating from, what do they call it? That lizard brain. It's just all reactionary and you don't have the patience or the curiosity to lean into how they're treating you.
And you just brought back a wonderful memory for me. Thank you for that, of riding my bike around Yokohama. And I had a basket in the front and a basket in the back. And Lindsay would be on the back and she had like little mini handlebars.
Yep.
And I put my groceries in the front and they would go, trying to dodge all the old people because I was bicycling on the pavement, and it was just wonderful. And it was a wonderful way to feel like you're part of the community. And I think that is one of the ways is interacting with people, except when the bicycle would fall down or she never rolled out. She never did, but there's a couple of times.
She held on really well for 2-year-old.
Exactly.
And that's another thing. Our kids are way more resilient than we give them credit for. Oh my gosh. They're just that's all they know. They're normal. If you're with them, they don't care. They're happy as a clam.
Yes. Yes. Especially at that very young age. I think the science is beginning to say something about third culture kids, as if they grow up overseas and they move a lot, have more ACEs, which is more sort of situations, and they can suffer from some trauma. So yes, that's the best time to travel with them. I think when they're young and they're bouncy and they're just adaptable because they're still just adapting to life.
Yeah.
And so they haven't made a decision in their mind yet that they don't like that kind of food, except my 2-year-old ate sushi and rice before we moved to Japan. As soon as she got to Japan, she wouldn't eat rice.
Oh, no, that's hard.
So, you just have to accept the differences that seem like difficulties because they are your new reality.
Yep. I'd like to share since a lot of what you're talking about is repatriation. And I have one kind of repatriation story that I think it exemplifies kind of what we were talking about. You can't always get what you want, but you learn to get what you need. And you do adapt like that and you find your treats. And so when you come back to the States, or it's probably not just to the States, because like you might think if you're a Chinese family and you're living in America and you return to Shanghai, it's going to be the same in reverse because that's your comfort zone. But when you get back to your home culture, you find that now there's so much of what you wanted, all of the things that you love in your culture, you're back there. There's so much of it. But we were very overwhelmed by the grocery store.
Yes, we all have the story. Tell us your grocery store story.
Well, when we moved back to Franklin, it was still a smallish town in the 90s. It, of course, has exploded. But, there were 2 or 3 grocery stores we could go to. And the one aisle that completely just took me out every time was the salad dressing aisle.
Mine was a milk.
There. It's still a thing.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I can have 6 brands of Italian or Catalina or this or this. Oh, I can have low fat. Oh, I can have fat free. Oh, I can make my own. And we were standing there, and sometimes the decision-making process was so huge and so heavy. Occasionally we would just leave.
Yes.
And
I hear that from everybody. Everybody I've interviewed says they have a moment.
Yeah. And so what we did to counter that was, at the time, one of our grocery stores was smaller than the rest. And that's the one we went to. When we had to go to the big Kroger's, that was overwhelming, and we had to prepare ourselves to go. So our general grocery shopping was to a small store called Buy Low. And we went there for years and years. And when they finally closed it, we were so bummed, just because we had become so comfortable there. And it had everything that we wanted, certainly everything we needed, and enough of what we wanted that we were content there. And going to the big stores, honestly, the giant superstores are still overwhelming to us. And I would venture to say even people who haven't lived in another culture can be overwhelmed there. That's a lot.
Absolutely. And one of the things that happens, I think, is that we have these built-in triggers now. I mean, you say bicycling in Asia, and immediately I have a trigger built into my brain that has that picture, and that not just the picture, but I can almost feel the senses in my body of the love and the joy that I was experiencing there. And I also think that going to the grocery store is one of those triggers, because it triggers, it triggers me into, oh, I wish I was standing in the commissary and I had 3 kinds of milk to choose.
Yeah. Right.
So, our diaries can be a whole page of stories, or they can be these moments that we just get trigger.
But going back to one thing that Sharon said, I think the stories come from the places where things were different or hard or confusing. And those are the disruptors in our life, where our brain has to readjust and say, okay, this is different. I can't react the same. I can't react just from my automatic here. I'm going to have to do something intentional. And that's what gets us out of our biases and our, the ruts. We literally have ruts in our brain. And so when we have those disruptive experiences, you've heard even from people who don't travel overseas, the best camping experience is one where a few things goes wrong, because otherwise you don't have a story, right?
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. Well, thank you so much, Monica, for joining us today. Tell us what projects you're going to work on, will be working on, where our listeners can find more of your conversation.
Well, I would like to say that kind of my main speaking topic now that I'm trying to just help people do is communicate better. All these experiences and cross-cultural opportunities and personality profiles that, really have helped me in my own life. I want to help people communicate better, because we have so many tools that we're just confused, and we don't, or we're demanding in our form, and we're just speaking so many different languages. And I don't mean, the actual words we're speaking. So, that's just one of my personal things, is please don't give up on any relationship. It's probably just a communication style, and you can make other changes. You could find me at monicaneubauer.com. And honestly, if somebody were to Google me, they can find lots of things. I have LinkedIn pages and Facebook and all that. So the monicaneubauer.com and openconversation.com are my 2 places where you can find my podcast and more things about me. Thank you for having me.
It's excellent. Thank you so much. It's been a joy.
Thank you very much, Monica and Sharon. And for our listeners, we would request that you listen to this and share it and review it, please. And we hope that you learn from some of the super juicy conversation about superpowers today. Thank you, everyone.